Welcome, everyone, to the Technical Coordinating Committee meeting of Thursday, October 20th. I'm sorry, Thursday, October 19th. We're going to begin and just handle information items for now. We don't have a quorum, so we'll move ahead with non-action items. So if we can begin with self-introductions, if we can start to my right.
Jamar Stamps, Contra Costa County.
Stephanie Mack, MTC.
Andy Dillard, Town of Danville.
Tom Reyes, Tri-Delta Transit.
Andy Smith, Walnut Creek, actually here for Transpac.
Jerry Fay, Contra Costa County.
Steve Kirschvan, City of Brentwood.
Yvette Ortiz, City of El Cerrito.
Heather Ballinger, Walnut Creek, City County Engineers.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to public comment, I do have a request to speak form, but it's for agenda item 4.0. But if there's any members of the public that would like to speak on an agenda item, on an item that is not on the agenda, welcome to do so now. Seeing none, we're going to move on to, we will have to skip the approval summary of actions as well as the consent calendar. And we can move on to item 3.0, which is the project monitoring report. Stephanie?
Hello, good afternoon. Mine's going to be very quick. It's not a lot going on, but oh, yay, don't need to stretch. Did you want to do, should I continue or do you want to? Okay. Just wanted to point your attention to the inactive projects list on page 3-7. The next milestone dates for invoice submittal is November 20th. So if your agency's projects are on this list, please be mindful of that deadline and submit your invoices by then. And then also this month's agenda, we included the MTC Resolution 3606, which is the Regional Project Delivery Policy Guidelines. As we're all starting our OBAC 2 projects or having it programmed, we just thought it'd be good to include this again. It's an ongoing policy that we have to follow for all FHWA funded projects. So with that, I'll take any questions that you guys may have.
Okay, no questions. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you.
Do we have a quorum? We do. Great. Okay. With that, I'm going to move back to item C, approval of summary of actions of the Technical Coordinating Committee of meeting of August 30th.
Motion.
Second.
Yep. Motion and a second. Item passes. All in favor?
Aye.
Now item passes. Okay. Moving on to the consent calendar. We have the attendance log, and we also have a funding summary. Items 1.0 and 2.0. A motion?
So moved.
Second.
All right, all in favor? Aye. All right, motion passes. Okay, so we're moving on to item 4.0. And I do have a request to speak form under this item. Should we take that first or after the presentation? Okay, I'd like to invite Bruce Olson from Bike East Bay. He'd like to speak on the item. Mr. Olson.
Good afternoon, gentlemen and women. I'm Bruce Olson, citizen of Pittsburgh, speaking for bicyclists in Contra Costa County through Bike East Bay. This has to do with level of service. As currently defined, it is motor vehicle centric and completely ignores level of safety for pedestrians and bicyclists. We need to work on this definition and make it a little more inclusive. That definition, the one we're working under currently, was appropriate in the last century, but times change, and we must too. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Olson, for your comments. Appreciate it. I'd like to introduce Matt Kelly. He's going to provide a presentation on the 2017 draft CMP LOS monitoring. Matt.
And I'll get to this on item 5 a little bit more, but just to address Mr. Olson's comments, he is right. It is an antiquated measure of transportation, and currently it is required by the state to do the congestion management program monitoring of LOS standards on the network. However, the state has also changed the rule in CEQA regarding level of service and the impacts in CEQA, and so we expect that the use of LOS in the CMP will probably be going away sometime in the future, but for now we are required to monitor the system for its level of service. So I am presenting the 2017 draft CMP level of service monitoring. So we did the monitoring in the spring. Just like I said, CMP requires biennial monitoring, which is every 2 years. Then on the network, and the network, which was defined back in 91 or so when the CMP legislation was passed, required that we have a CMP network, and that was defined as the state-maintained freeway system and principal arterials. Principal arterials were chosen based on the following criteria: that the road is 4 lanes or wider for at least a mile, that the average daily traffic is 20,000 or above on at least a mile's worth of that roadway, and that the roadway is designated as a route of regional significance by the RTPC. So the CMP network is basically a subset of the routes of regional significance. And the arterial performance, the non-freeway routes, are their performance is determined by monitoring of intersections. And the intersections were chosen based on the fact that they were considered a major intersection on the network, that it was an intersection of 2 routes on the CMP network, or an intersection where there weren't, this is kind of an antiquated statement, but where there wasn't information available for neighboring intersections. So that's what went on 25 years ago. And we haven't changed the network other than adding freeway segments as they are constructed, such as the Route 4 bypass being added to the state highway system. So here is the network. The thick lines are the freeways, the thin lines are those routes of regional significance subset, and the dots are the intersections. There are 65 intersections and 95 miles worth of freeway segments divided up into 23 monitoring segments. Like I said, we did the data collection in March, April, and May. According to technical procedures, we can only monitor on Tuesday, Wednesdays, Thursdays, no public holidays, no major incidents or construction going on in the area, and no spring break or any school holidays. The intersections were done basically collecting turning movement counts. This year, there were no people sitting out in the field. It was all use of cameras, both cameras that just videotaped and then were manually reviewed after the fact, and then some using MyoVision, which does kind of uses video, and then there's an algorithm which actually does automatic counts using the video. And freeways, we used big data source of INRIX, which was provided to us by MTC. So on the freeways, basically the way the methodology for the way the data was analyzed is that they mapped all the segments to match the CMP segments, because INRIX has like thousands and thousands of segments. They aggregated all the data together and averaged the speeds over those segments, and then assigned a level of service to each segment. Instead of data sources, that should say intersections. So basically, we updated all the Syncro files for each intersection, which is why I was bugging all of you guys for signal timing plans and any intersection geometry that you might have had. So thank you for providing that. As you may remember, we used to do CCTA LOS for our LOS methodology, and we didn't need all of that information. Now that we're using Syncro and the Highway Capacity Manual methodology, we need all that information, so it was kind of a big effort to get all that information into our system. And the LOS assignment was done using, like I said, the HCM, mainly 2010 methodology, but there were some intersections where the geometry was weird, and we had to use HCM 2000 methodology. But it's noted where that was done. And at every intersection, we collected bike and pedestrian counts, approach counts at each leg of the intersection. And that's kind of our way of adding some multimodalness to this effort. So we've now been collecting bike and pedestrian counts since 2011, I believe. So we're kind of developing a historical database. Okay, to the results. To put the results in context, between 2013 and 2017, here's a kind of a look at employment in the East Bay, the Oakland, Hayward, Fremont area, which is basically covers Alameda and Contra Costa counties. So the blue line is employment over the last 4 years, and the red dotted line is delay. Vehicles basically moving less than 35 miles per hour. And you can see that they kind of mirror each other. So that's why I say jobs equals traffic. Freeway results. Here's just kind of a broad look at the level of service for the 23 segments. You can see for the most part, you know, we're in A or B, and then the next most popular score is F. So we're kind of at either extreme on average. Summarize the freeways, the 23 segments. In the AM, 21 segments came in at their threshold or better, and for the most part, the thresholds are E or F. There were 2 in the AM that didn't meet their threshold. Those are westbound 24 from 680 to Oak Hill Road in Lafayette. That carried over from 2015. And then also in the AM, the westbound Richmond San Rafael Bridge approach. And that was a new one to 2017. Anybody who drives that often will tell you that didn't exist a few years ago, and now it's, you know, 3 or 4 mile backup every morning. In the PM, 20 of the segments met their standard, 3 did not. Those 3 were eastbound SR4 between 680 and 242. State Route 24 eastbound between the Alameda County line, and basically the tunnel, and Camino Pablo and Orinda. That was also a new to the report. 242 northbound between 680 and 4, and that was another new segment that didn't meet its threshold. And here's just a map showing the level of service based on color, and those two areas that did not meet their threshold, the Richmond Bridge and approach, and westbound 24 in the AM. PM, Central County gets hit pretty hard with level of service F, with those 3 segments, 242 north, eastbound 24 and eastbound 4. So for intersections, we have 65 of them. In both the AM and PM peak hour, 63 met their standard. One in both AM and PM did not, and you'll say, well, Matt, that doesn't add up to 65. Well, that's because one of them is the counting firms counted the wrong leg of the intersection just over here at North Main 680. There's kind of a weird intersection at the southbound ramps that we're recounting right now. And I don't anticipate that will fall into the non-achieving group. And the one intersection that was exceeded both in the AM and PM is San Pablo Avenue at John Muir Parkway in Hercules. It's also where the ramps from Highway 4 land, kind of the beginning of Highway 4 or the end of Highway 4. We are counting and analyzing that intersection. However, if it does show up again as level of service F, it is a Caltrans operated intersection, and there's nothing we can really do about that. We don't have to prepare a deficiency plan on that. So here's kind of a summary of the level of service at all the intersections. A little different from the freeways. We're kind of in the mid-ranges here for the most part, C and D, which in the peak hour I think is relatively reasonable. And then those charts to the right are showing comparison between 2015 and 2017. And there you can see there were actually some improvements between 2015 and 2017 in the AM, and actually a little worse in the PM. It's a little tough to see, but this is just a map of all the intersections and color-coded by their level of service score. And up in the top left, you can see that one intersection in Hercules, also in the PM. So in the report, we note some improvements to the system that could positively affect some of these areas that are exceeding their standards. That includes the southbound Interstate 680 HOV lane, kind of gap closure and conversion to express lane, which will be starting soon. The phase 3 of the 684 interchange project from Morella to Port Chicago Highway, which you saw was on that list, and is also part of MTC's top 10 most congested locations in the Bay Area. And EBART opening, we hope, will have a positive impact there. Operational improvements include the Innovate 680 program of projects that includes that HOV lane project, but some other operational strategies. The SR4 operational improvements project, and various arterial signal timings and intersection improvements that the cities are working on around the region. Plus the RM3 included Richmond-San Rafael Bridge toll plaza improvements. We hope will have a positive impact on that backup. So the monitoring data is available for all of you to use in your local planning studies, traffic impact reports, whatever you need them for. On the left are the actual count sheets where you have the vehicles and the bike and pedestrian counts. And then on the right are the synchro analysis sheets for the level of service. So those are all part of the appendices of the report and are free for you to use. We are asking you, that's the end, we are asking for you to review the report as is and just let us know if there are any glaring errors that you see, especially in the locations that you know the best. But basically, the report, is pretty much documents a snapshot in time. So we aren't expecting many changes between the draft and the final. But please, if you see anything in the report that you think needs addressing, let me know. I don't think the synchro or count sheets will change, so you're free to start using those for your needs. But that's the report. I can take any questions.
I just have a quick question, just because I'm Walnut Creek. So the one at San Luis that's in error, is that a Caltrans controlled
It is,
intersection?
yeah.
Okay.
So,
So either way, it won't matter.
yeah. It's that weird San Luis leg, San Luis by the
Yeah,
7-Eleven.
right by the, general plumbing and.
They counted the non-signalized portion of it.
Matt, what's the timing for comments if people want to peruse the appendix and dig into the details?
I would say the next month. We plan on bringing you as part of the monitoring, we also did the MTSO monitoring for the action plans. That data is a little more complex, and we're finalizing that now, so we'll bring that to you, and we plan to finalize, I think, everything together. So it'll probably be a couple of months before the CMP monitoring report is finalized, so you have some time. But I would say in the next month would be great. End of, say by the next TCC meeting.
Okay, any other questions?
I had one quick question, Matt, regarding the counts. Are those available electronically, like in an Excel format, or do you just have them in the PDF?
We have both.
And so we could just ask you for historical data that way too?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Seeing none, that's an informational item only. Thank you, Matt. Moving on to 5.0, submittal of draft final CMP to MTC for review. Again, this is an action item, so Matt?
Thank you, Chair. So back in June, we brought you the draft congestion management program, the 2017 update. You guys provided us with comments on the projects and other components of the congestion management plan. We've gone ahead and updated it with references to the recently adopted 2017 RTP, Plan Bay Area 2040. It's now kind of in a place where it's ready to be reviewed at the staff level by MTC. So they take a look at it, make sure it kind of hits all the right points and is consistent with the RTP and so forth, and then they indicate any comments they have. We then incorporate those into the report and then adopt the final, and so that's scheduled for adoption in December by the authority board. MTC hasn't released their CMP guidance yet this year. They normally do that earlier in the year, and they haven't yet, so I'm not anticipating anything. If they do release the guidance, I don't know, Stephanie, if you know what. Yeah. Yeah, that's what I've heard as well. So we're going to go ahead and submit without that guidance and just assume that or just hope that we addressed all the guidelines. But we assume that MTC will let us know if we haven't. So we just kind of brought it to you today to get your approval to forward it on to MTC staff for their review. So that's really all I have on that item. But if you have any questions about what was updated or anything about the CMP, I can take that at this time.
I have a question, Matt. On the Appendix E, the 7-year CIP,
Yes.
for the newer projects that were awarded through OBAG 2 and TLC, is there, there's no committed funding amounts listed?
Yeah, we didn't get all that, the project details updated. We basically focused on getting the projects and the cost and the schedule in there, but we weren't able to get all basically our database that allows us to do that was down. So we plan on doing that on our next call for projects when we get our new database project entry tool fixed. But the important part is having the project in the CIP. We can provide details if requested by MTC.
Any other questions? So this is an action item, and this is to forward this on to MTC for their review?
Yep.
So I'd ask for a motion.
Transmitted.
I'll second that.
Yeah, all in favor? Aye. Motion passes.
It's a technical term.
Okay, moving on to item 6.0. This is the discussion of the proposed changes to the road mileage methodology that would affect our Measure J local street maintenance improvement fund allocations. And this is also an action item. And Matt, you're up to that again.
Yeah, so this, I'm sure, is of interest to, a few of you in the room. So, as you know, we have a formula to determine the share of Measure J tax revenue to how that is distributed out to the jurisdictions, the 19 jurisdictions in the county. It's a combination of, the formula to determine that share is a combination of population and road mileage. We get that road mileage from the annual Caltrans report of maintained road miles, and that is a report that comes out of the HPMS program, the Highway Performance Monitoring System. It's a federal program that Caltrans administers here in the state. And so, it's always been a pretty, basic task. Each year we get the new report and we incorporate that into our formula and we compare the two, and usually there's negligible changes across the county. We just got the new report about a month ago. We compared the two and there were changes all over the place. And you can see that in attachment C. So we have the 2014 and 2015 reports in attachments A and B. The 2015 is the most recent that was just released. And then when you look at attachment C, you can see how the changes in road mileage, reported road mileage, affect the allocations by jurisdiction. We don't know exactly why the change occurred. We do know that what prompted the change was the requirement of FHWA to the DOTs to use a linear referencing system. It's just a different way of measuring the roadways. And when Caltrans instituted their linear referencing system, and I believe the way they report privately maintained road mileage, that's how they got the changes occurred. I've reached out to Caltrans headquarters, HPMF staff, haven't heard back. I was hoping Caltrans staff would be present today, but they're not. But we are going to reach out to the district and headquarters again to kind of get to the bottom of this. But the bottom line is we have this new road report, which we were planning on using for our fiscal year 2016-17 off-year payments to the cities, some of which are due now. So some of you are probably expecting your off-year payment. This is why you haven't received that payment, because we were wrestling with how to deal with this. We decided to come to you first before moving on with this. Our recommendation is to continue using the 2014 road miles for the fiscal year 2016-17 off your LSM and 18% and 2.09 additional payments, which would give you what you're expecting. Some of you ask for estimates before the final proceeds are available, or final revenues are available. So some of you have estimates. These don't, the new 2015 mileage based allocations don't match those revenues. So our recommendation is to continue using the 2014 road miles and not pit the winners and losers against each other. I proposed putting, the winners on one side and the losers on the other side of the room and just having you guys battle it out, but thought that might not fit in with our collaborative, cooperative planning process. Like I said, our proposal is to continue using the 2014 road miles and to establish a working group of TCC members. It would also include myself and Stephanie, and we would work with Caltrans staff and also look into any other alternative methods of measuring the roadway system. And I spoke to Steve Kurzavan earlier this week, and he mentioned the PTAP system that MTC maintains for the pavement management. And since you guys are reporting to them your road mileage, that's a potential source. So this working group would look into things like that, but also try and get to the bottom of what Caltrans did, what they plan on doing in the future, and if they plan on continuing with the linear referencing system they have. They also indicated that the 2015 report may change sometime this year. So, yeah. So, yeah. So, with all those variables in play, we thought it's best to stick with what we know and establish a working group of you guys to kind of come up with a solution. So the recommendation is, like I said, is continue using 2014 for the time being and establish this working group. And so I would, if that's acceptable to you guys, then I'll need some volunteers, and that can either come today or through the RTPCs, however however you think is best. Probably 3 members, I would say, at minimum. Maybe 4 to represent each subregion. But I can take any questions on this. Not sure I can answer them, but.
So what would this working group be really charged with doing? Just kind of assessing the 2014 criteria and then just offering some recommendations, or what?
Yeah, so one, it would be, we'd hopefully get a report from Caltrans on what they did and how they plan on moving forward with this new system, and then looking into other sources. Basically, we need to come up with a system so that when cities add or remove publicly maintained road mileage from the system, that we have a way of tracking that. Whether that's us tracking that or MTC tracking that, that's what the group would be tasked with, coming up with a solution for moving forward. Because, if your guys' road mileage changes, we want that to be reflected in the formula so that you're reimbursed, you get the funding for those additional road miles.
So then the information that So Caltrans has all the information on road mileage, and so we'll be looking at whoever the working group is. They'll be looking at the road mileage for each of our jurisdictions that Caltrans has listed, right?
Yeah.
And what if we don't agree with that necessarily? We have to contact Caltrans.
Yeah, so we'll be working with Caltrans, whether it's headquarters or District 4 staff. So we think that'll take some time. That's why we didn't want to try and make a decision right away. We think this has to be carefully thought out, and we probably want to involve MTC because of the data they collect as part of the payment management program, and see if the information that's being collected there would be a worthy replacement for the Caltrans data. But basically, those two entities the cities are reporting data to those two entities. So it makes sense that we would use one of those sources, or maybe there is another source out there that we're not aware of that would work.
Okay, one last question. So you may or may not have this answer. So how much time do you think this working group, members in this working group, need to devote to this? How many days a week?
I would say it would probably be a series of maybe 4 to 5 meetings over the next 6 months, maybe monthly meetings. And then, because we have some time until the next round of return to source payments, or the next cycle is out. So that gives us about 8 months or so before those payments are due. So we'd like to get that and get it resolved in that period of time. So when you guys are submitting your checklist next year, that the money is available and in the amounts that you guys feel is what your jurisdiction actually has on the ground.
Quick question. Sounds like the duties of this committee would be more something along the lines of something engineers would do than, say, city planners.
Sure. Yeah. So I assume that means you're not interested, Andy.
Not at all. I'm not sure what help I would be able to bring to the table.
Yeah.
First of all, thanks for having the cooler head and saying, let's just go with the numbers we have. Being the jurisdiction that lost more mileage, 48 miles, so basically I lost Clayton from Brentwood. Let me just correct you on one thing.
Okay.
PTAP and Street Saver, we do not report the mileage. They go out and measure the mileage.
Okay.
The consultant measures it foot by foot, every single street. That is about as fail-safe of a way of getting this done as I can imagine. So my only thought is, prior to putting a working group together, maybe you need to get MTC and Caltrans together so they can discuss this PTAP program, which, correct me if I'm wrong, but every city in the county has it, correct? Because it's part of OMAG too, you have to report, correct?
Yeah.
That is, just a dumb traffic engineer from Brentwood, but that's about the cleanest and safest way to go. All respect to the county who's gaining $300,000 in this whole thing, but 150 of it's mine. That would seem that if there can be an agreement between those two parties that this is what we accept, and this gets done every 2 years, I think that's a very good way to go, because it's extremely rare that a public street goes private. It just does not happen that often. The possibility that, whatever city included their private streets, we did not, and the PTAP program does not. That seems like the easiest and cleanest way to go.
Right. And I haven't been able to get access to that data yet. I wanted to do a comparison between the PTAP data and the HPMS data, so I just haven't been able to make that comparison yet, but I agree that could be a good first step. Might be worth identifying numbers just to kind of sign off on whatever methodology we come up with. But I'm open to either. We can start with the regional agencies and move on from there, or start with a working group.
I think that's a good possibility to explore, but I'm also concerned that that might still change the allocations between jurisdictions. So it's something that we really need to study as part of the working group that you establish.
Can I further on that? Because I was going to make that same comment, because I looked at 2015, again, just for Walnut Creek. Sorry to keep being parochial here, but so we went up in mileage, which you would think that you would go up, and yet our allocation went down. And I think that's because the whole pie has to get divided by all of us, and the pie doesn't change. And so I think some of this might not be just miles. It could be the allocation being just redistributed, right?
Yeah, definitely. And there are some weird anomalies going on here. Like if you look at the county for their 18%, as Steve mentioned, they get about 300,000 additional. But if you look at the sub-regional 2.09% allocation, they actually lose money. So what I glean from that is that the East County doesn't have the 2.09%. So those three county lines there on the 2.09% are Southwest, Central, and West. So something to me happened in East County that kind of affected everybody. That's one thing I took from this. So yeah, there's some weird things going on.
I guess it looks like we gained money in those regions too. They're bracketed like a loss, but money-wise, it's a gain.
I'm noticing there seems to be a correlation between the cities that have increased percentage of rural miles
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
versus urbanized. That's where the ones that gain the rural miles get more money and the rest of us lose.
Matt, I was going to ask one more question, and maybe you're not ready for it yet, because is there any rules we're breaking if we use the 14 numbers, as opposed to going with new data? Because it's,
I don't believe so.
okay.
And just on the rural mile things, they stopped reporting rural miles in the 2015 report. So it's another change there.
So presumably, if we use the 14, we're all agreeing that status quo is okay with all of us, right? Because there are winners and losers out of this. So, I mean, this kind of discussion happened not that long ago when Lafayette was proposing that we use maintenance, your PCI. Do you remember all that discussion? And there was winners and losers out of that, too. So there would be no retroactivity, right? So we're all agreeing that
You're agreeing to kind of stick with the status quo. The first year payments you received for your return to source funding you'd basically be getting the same share for your off year payment, but more based on the increased tax revenue. Using the same formula and the same road miles. So the population would.
Andy, can I ask another question? Can we ask Caltrans for these numbers? Can you show me my 154 miles road by road, street by street?
Yeah, well, there is an HPMS report. Maybe I should have included a link to that, but they do have an HPMS report online that documents all. I do believe it documents by city and by county, yeah.
So maybe, Matt, it might be an idea to come back, bring this back to TCC and look at the Street Saver versus the HPMS.
Okay.
And see if we need to move forward with an ad hoc, and maybe that'll help determine that need. So just a suggestion.
I'm fine with that.
I have one more question. Okay. So what's your timing again on this? Because you were saying before the next checklist is completed, so if that working group needs to meet for like 4 months or something like that, would that encroach into the timing?
Yeah, so the next round of checklists can start being submitted in April of next year, but the first payment wouldn't be available till around September 1st of next year.
So how would the timing of waiting till our next meeting in November? How would that be a problem?
I hope that would be enough time. I mean, I think that gives us at least 6 months to work through it. I'm hoping it wouldn't take that long, but in case it did, I think that would give us enough time.
Okay.
And you could always make the decision to continue using the 2014 miles if we get to that point and we haven't reached a solution.
Man, I don't have a dog in this fight, but I will tell you, and Nikki can support this. We went through something similar with transit funding 2 years ago when the state controller decided to to come up that there was much more eligibility for STA. And all of a sudden, everything was in flux. And we ended up using a similar approach. We ended up adopting for that 1 year, but challenging it, and it went back to the way things were. Through a court process, sadly, but I think your proposal, CCTA's proposal, to stand firm for the moment and then look at it and try to figure out what's going on is a sound proposal.
The last time you're going to hear from me. It says here that you used the Department of Finance reports for population and California Department of Transportation Caltrans for road miles. Can that second part be changed? Instead of using Caltrans, use MTC's PTAP or whatever other source we all agree on?
I don't believe there's any language in Measure J that specifically calls out those sources. So I think it says road miles, yeah.
Well, do you want a motion that we use 14 numbers for this year's allocation? Would that?
Yeah, at a minimum, that's what I'd
Okay, I'll
like
move
from
that.
you guys.
Can I just ask that you send the link out to the HPMS? So we can, maybe between now and our next TCC, all the agencies can check what they have versus what Caltrans has them down for?
And get Caltrans here.
Good luck hearing back from them.
And I'd like to add to that motion that this come back to TCC for further discussion. So the motion's been made. Is there a second? Second? All in favor? Aye. Okay, motion passes. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. That takes us to our next item, other communications. Is there any other communications?
I would like to introduce Lillian Arvisu. I think I got her last name right. She just joined our team on Tuesday. She's the new planning assistant replacing Diane Bowden. So you'll be seeing her around.
Okay, last item, adjournment to next meeting. Our next meeting is Thursday, November 16th. Meeting adjourned.